So in this video, we're going to be making a great unclean one, and we're going to be converting it. I kind of have in mind converting it kind of in a dark mechanicum kind of vibe, and we also have this miasmic malinifier as well, which would be pretty good for kit bashing. So we'll see what we come up with. The first thing I'm doing is just putting together the foundation of the model. So I wanted to have a head that is completely unique, instead of just using the default get and clean one head. And I grabbed this piece from the Mythic Blight Hauler, and I've cut out the top a little bit. And then I've also grabbed this piece from one of the hand pieces for the Great Unclean one, and just cut the top off, and these kind of fit together like this. I'm just using some hot glue just to crudely glue this on here. And then we can always sculpt and put bits on to fill in the gaps here. So we got the head glued on there, and I've just loaded it up with hot glue. And again, we can just come back and sculpt over that. But in a similar fashion, I'm going to load up these chimney things with some hot glue and glue them on here. And I'm just going to put layers of hot glue until it's nice and sturdy, and we'll just sculpt over those. So I've cut out this handhole here so that it can fit these mechanical tendrils. Just gonna use some hot glue to glue these in here. These tendrils are from the Chaos Knight set, by the way. I'm going to use a little chunk of XPS foam to fill in this gap where there's a little bit too large of a gap to put this hand on, and just loading up with hot glue and putting that on there. I'm gluing in some wires from the miasmic malinifier into the belly here, and I'm also using another one of the Great Unclean One faces to glue on the belly. And then I'm taking some of these tentacle pieces from one of the arm variations, and I'm just going to glue these on to the arm here. I'm drilling out this eyeball here because I'm going to put a bigger one in. So I think I got most of the bits attached here that I want. I just drilled holes and slotted these chains in here, and they're looping through the holes on the chimney. So now that we're done with most of the building process, we're going to start doing some sculpting and integrating all the pieces in. And you'll see me using sculpting tools, mostly these rubberized sculpting tools that you can get at pretty much any craft store. And what I usually use is a mixture of epoxy clay and green stuff, usually about 70% epoxy sculpt and 30% green stuff is a good mixture. I find that the epoxy sculpt is good because you can get a lot of volume of it for cheap. It's very soft, which is good. The green stuff is a little bit more dense and stiff, but it's also a little bit more elastic and less prone to kind of cracking, so a mixture of the two is a pretty good thing to use for most cases. I'm using this tentacle roller from Green Stuff World to make some cables, and I'm actually using a bit more of the green stuff as a bit denser material is good for this case. It's just a matter of carefully getting these on here, putting this one on the belly, just trying to tuck it in there so that it stays on. So the good thing about mixing these two different types of clays, you can kind of mix it differently depending on what you're going for. Like I said, with the tentacles, I use a bit more green stuff to have it denser. And for this flesh, I'm going to use a little bit more of the epoxy sculpt. If you can find you a set of these rubberized sculpting tools that also has these little balls on the end, these are really good for making Nurgle flesh. You can use this to kind of make texture, little bumps, and kind of hollow out little craters, so these are super useful. Yeah, I'm just using this ball thing here to make some little craters. which really helps add some realism to the sculpted parts. Using my X-Acto knife here to create an edge where this armored helmet ends and these wires kind of stick out with some flesh. I just dip my X-Acto knife in some water and just cut these little cracks in the armor there. So we've gotten a lot of the sculpting done here, and just decided to add another piece. I'm going to use this tail from the Chaos Knights piece as a spine here. I'm going to hot glue that in and then sculpt around it to integrate it on there. So I'm starting out with just putting some green stuff on here and sculpting the ends of his spine here, kind of curving down into his body, using my X-Acto knife to separate out the different segments of the spinal cord here. And after that's done, we're just going to load up a bunch of green stuff around it and just start integrating that onto the body and making this spine kind of tearing out of him. Gonna use these tools here to make some craters and some wounds in his flesh here. So that's pretty much it for the sculpting for now. I've integrated all the pieces in, and I've also done a lot of gap filling. There's a lot of crevices on here that I had to fill with some green stuff, but now we're going to move on to working on the base. I have all these bark pieces that I got from a tree outside, and I'm just gluing those down with hot glue, making sure he kind of fits flush on there. So I've got these tree bark pieces on here as these rocks, and I want to have kind of a Nurgle's garden kind of vibe on the base. I've got these branches that maybe I can stick out and some tentacles that I've cut off from various pieces from the Great Unclean One kit. Putting a thick layer of PVA glue on these rocks to seal them up, make sure they don't come apart, and so that things will glue on top of them nicely. I'm using some homemade texture paint, putting this on here, mainly up against the rocks here. And I'm going to kind of scrape away and try to make some flat areas because I'm going to try to have some puddles of slime on here once I get to painting the model. I'm gluing this guy down here using a ton of hot glue, and any hot glue that's sticking out, I'll just use some texture paint over it to integrate it on there. Gluing some of these little pieces onto my base here, and once that's done, that'll pretty much be it for the building part of this. So with the base done, that's pretty much everything for this guy. Next up we'll be painting him, and probably gonna do that in the next video, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for checking out the video.